My name is Ashley Lance, and I'm a senior associate with Griffin Hammis Associates. You are joining us as part of a benefits planning series. So there are 5 total webinars. This is webinar 1 of 5. So today we are just covering a very basic overview of Social Security Administration and the adult disability benefits. So we're first going to dive in and talk about what exactly is your role, and then we're going to talk about each of the basic concepts of Social Security Title II benefits and Supplemental Security Income benefits. I first want to highlight that after attending the series of this webinar, you're not going to be an expert, not even close, and that's not the intent. So the intent is really that you're just going to walk away with the very basic concepts. I think identifying, well, one, I just want to point out that I even have a hard time identifying myself as an expert in benefits. I have a lot of experience, and I completed a certification that I maintain CEUs for to understand benefits and how benefits and work go together. But I just want to highlight that the experts are really housed within your work incentive planning and assistance projects. And each state has what we call a WIPA project, or work incentive planning and assistance project. Yours, if you are in Utah, is the Utah Work Incentive Planning and Assistance Project, or UWIPS. And that's where your local experts are housed, where they are supporting beneficiaries who receive benefits and are working every single day. So the folks who are experts are the folks that are supporting folks daily. They're using these skills on the regular. And then they also, we all have TA that we go to, or technical assistants, and those guys are really experts too. So I just want to highlight that just by attending this webinar series, you're not going to be an expert. The intent is not that you're an expert, but really to just be more confident in having a conversation about benefits and how benefits and work go together. So again, the thing that I want you to walk away with is just knowing the very basic knowledge around benefits. And so today we're just going to skim the very, like a little tiny bit of the iceberg, right? So of Social Security Title II benefits and Supplemental Security Income benefits. So we're going to talk about each of those. And again, just the very, very tip of the iceberg when it comes to both of these topics. So why do you need to know this information, right? How does this affect your role? Anyone who is supporting an individual who receives benefits, or a beneficiary, so an individual with a disability who receives benefits and is looking for work, you have to know some level of information about how benefits and work go together, because the very reality is that folks with disabilities are considering how work will affect their benefits, oftentimes first and foremost. Because for a lot of folks, that medical benefit that goes with their benefit, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but that's their lifeline, right? So if I receive Medicaid services, I've got to keep that Medicaid to make sure that I receive the supports through Medicaid, right? So just know also that when someone applies for benefits, that it's a very invasive process. And it oftentimes takes a lot of information that highlights every negative label somebody carries. It oftentimes looks at their bank accounts and their financial need for the benefit. It oftentimes requires multiple applications. So when someone gets onto benefits, and the idea of they've oftentimes been told many myths about how benefits and work go together, that's impacting their decision, right? So we as employment practitioners need to feel comfortable in having the conversation, and more importantly, connecting them to experts that can really walk somebody through that information. So the issue is also that the work rules and programs around the two benefits are incredibly confusing, and there are myths everywhere. So if we were sitting in a room together, I would ask you all to, by a show of hands, how many of you heard, oh, I can't work more than part-time or I'll lose my benefits, or I can't work more than 20 hours or I'll lose my benefits, right? So that's a myth. It's a myth associated with around benefits, and it's really specifically only tied to one benefit, right? So, but we'll dig into that, and you'll be able to unpack that myth a little bit and be able to provide folks with accurate information around that. So I also think of you after completing the webinar series as a myth buster, right? So all of us who have this information also now have a responsibility to really get out there and bust those myths when we hear them and connect folks to experts in our state to again help them walk through that. But work rules and programs are confusing, and so it's easier just to say, I think I'll just work this little bit and be safe, and folks miss out on working to their full potential because of the myths around the benefits. And so as a result, people are choosing not to work or limiting work out of fear of losing those benefits, right? So just as I had mentioned a minute ago, that folks are saying, I think I'll just work less, or I think I'll just work part-time or less than part-time, just so I know that I'm safe, that I'm not going to risk anything around that benefit, right? And so folks are working not to their full potential, and oftentimes not taking advantage of all of the work incentives that also come with benefits that encourage folks to work. So we're going to talk about all of this in the next couple of weeks. And so I encourage you to continue to join us for each webinar as we dive a little bit further into various topics. So how does this fit into your job, right? As an employment practitioner, as an employment specialist, again, the intent is not that you're going to be an expert. That's not the intent at all. But really just to feel a bit more comfortable in having a conversation. So as you're supporting someone in obtaining employment, talking about employment, and those early conversations, if you're supporting someone in discovery, right? That as those questions come up around work and benefits, that you feel a bit more comfortable in saying, you bet, tell me more about your concerns around benefits. Or when you hear that question of, oh, I don't think I can work more than part-time or I'll lose my benefits. Well, let's talk more about that, right? So feeling more comfortable in just asking that question or that prompting point of, let's talk more about that. So weave it into your current conversations, because oftentimes it's just a lot of underlying fear and lack of information around how benefits and work go together. So we want you to weave it into your existing conversations. Another point is that you might start, if you are having folks apply for services, or if you have any admissions paperwork that folks fill out, that you're asking questions around benefits. So maybe it's, what benefits do you currently receive? And a lot of you are probably already asking that question. But then maybe it's, would you like more information about how benefits and work go together? Or do you need more information around reporting your earnings when you obtain employment, right? So again, that's what we mean by weaving it into your existing conversations. The other piece is that you dedicate some time to address the need with some or all of the job seekers that you're serving, right? So if you know that someone receives benefits and is looking for work or working, we want you to at least have the conversation of, or feel comfortable having the conversation of, hey, let's have a conversation about benefits and work. And do you know who you need to report to now that you got that really awesome job offer? It's going to be really important that you let Social Security know that you're working. Would you like any support with that? And then third is to make referrals when more information is needed. So it will absolutely happen. The more you have conversations around benefits, the more you're going to need to refer folks to experts, because they're going to bring something up like maybe a payback. And they're like, ooh, I got this letter and I owe Social Security, $5,000. Ooh, I know that I'm not an expert in that, but I do know that I need to connect you with your local experts over at UWIPS. And so we want you to know, one, how to make those referrals and when to identify when more information is needed. And so again, this is a series of 5 webinars, and we'll dive into that in a future webinar. Another piece of your role is to bring up the topic, right? So in those conversations, what might it look like? we want you to feel comfortable in bringing up the topic, right? So having that conversation of, I also note that you receive SSI. Do you have, let's talk about how SSI and work go together. You're in a really great place because the more you work, the more money you're going to make. So just being able to bring up the topic, to ask, do you have any questions around benefits and work? And 9 times out of 10 folks do, because Social Security Administration doesn't really have the capacity to meet one-on-one with everybody and provide that information, right? So folks can find it online, maybe in a pamphlet, but reading it and meeting with someone is very different, right? So we just want you to feel comfortable in bringing up the topic and then providing very basic information. We'll talk about this in one of our last webinars, but if you aren't absolutely confident in the information that you're sharing, then I would ask that you don't share and you connect somebody with an expert, because again, we are myth busters. And so I hope to set that example for you as well through our webinar series, because many of you will ask questions and I may not be, unless I'm 100% sure, I really don't want to answer, right? So I'm going to go back, make sure I look in the rules or connect with my TA folks and confirm that information for you before sharing it. And so I would expect that you would do the same. And that might be shooting me an email, it might be connecting with UWIPs, but you want to connect with your local work incentive planning and assistance projects and local experts within your state, which leads us to providing referrals, right? So when you're in a place of unknown, or if you know that someone has a scenario where they need more intensive supports around benefits, you want to be able to provide that referral. And then checking in. So as employment practitioners, you're supporting folks to obtain employment all the time, right? And that first conversation may have happened in your admissions procedures, or maybe when you were doing discovery, and now the person's in job development and they've obtained a job. Now it's time to check in and say, hey, you got a job. Let's make sure that you contact Social Security Administration and let them know that you're working. So that might be an example of a check-in. Or, hey, you've been working for a month now. Did you remember to send in those pay stubs to Social Security Administration? So we're just checking in with folks to see how they're doing, if they need any help reporting, if they need help communicating with SSA. So again, your role is not to be an expert, but really to have a conversation and help be a myth buster. So today, again, we're just going to touch on the very, very basics of Title II benefits and supplemental security income. So I want you, if you're a visual learner like myself, I want you to envision a house. And so in that house, there are 2 rooms. And in one room lives supplemental security income, or SSI, and in another room, Title II disability benefits lives there, or what we oftentimes refer to as Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI. So again, Social Security Administration is a house. SSI is actually a needs-based benefit that lives in one room, okay? So it's a different set of rules, right? It's a different benefit. It lives in the same house. SSA administers both benefits, but these benefits are very different. They have some commonalities, and we'll touch on those. But for the visualization, SSA is the house, SSI lives in one room, Title II disability benefits lives in another room, okay? And so between our time together, I'll ask you to open the door to one room and close the door to another as we also talk about the different topics. So here's an example. I want you to close the door to SSI, and I want you to open the door to Title II disability benefits as we spend some time talking about those benefits now. So one thing that's really important to know about Title II disability benefits is it's an insurance benefit. So what that means is anyone who's working, if you receive a paycheck, you are paying into that Title II benefit if you are ever to need it. So it's based on our Social Security tax. So if you look at your pay stub, and the next time if you get a pay stub, look at FICA. That's you contributing to the potential benefit of receiving an SSDI benefit if you were to become disabled and it kept you from meeting substantial gainful activity. So again, the idea is it's an insurance benefit. It's an earned benefit. Someone has paid into the system in order for you to receive that benefit. Also, there are 3 different ways that you can receive a Title II disability benefit. So if you think about our visual, SSA is the house, we've opened the door to Title II, and there are 3 different flavors. If you think about an ice cream cone, there are 3 different flavors of Title II disability benefits. And those 3 are Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI, which is oftentimes what we associate with a Title II benefit, right? Is, oh, that's SSDI. So that's one of the 3 flavors. 2 is a Social Security Childhood Disability Benefit, or a CDB, Childhood Disability Benefit. And this is where someone is pulling off of a parent who has paid into the system, and they're pulling off their parent's work record. And then there is Social Security Disabled Widowers Benefit, or DWB, which is the very smallest group of Title II beneficiaries. I've never even worked with someone who is a DWB. Excuse me. So those are the 3 different flavors of Title II benefits. And most of the folks that you work with, again, are going to be receiving SSDI or CDB if they're receiving a Title II benefit. But just know there are 3 different flavors. Also, with, so we're going to close the door to Social Security Disability Insurance benefits, or Title II benefits, right? So I want you to close the door to Title II, and I want you to open the door to Supplemental Security Income. So we're kind of bouncing back and forth right now. SSI is a needs-based benefit, right? So I just told you that Title II is an insurance benefit and somebody's paying into the system, right? So it's an earned benefit. SSI is the very opposite. SSI is needs-based, and it's based off the federal income tax. So we're all contributing to that, right? And so SSI, I have to be financially needy. I can't have a lot of resources. I can't have a lot of money. It's the bottom of the barrel, right? I have to have support to cover my food and my shelter. That's the intent of SSI. It's not a pretty benefit. It's not intended to cover a whole lot. And so the ugly name for it really is welfare. But you know the difference is that Title II is earned. SSI is a needs-based benefit. It's a financial need in order for me to receive this benefit, okay? So kind of 2 stark differences, and that's why we also want to separate them, right? They're 2 very different benefits. And I also want to highlight another way that you can bust a myth is that oftentimes when we hear SSI, we think Social Security income. No, it's supplemental security income. It's administered by the Social Security Administration, but other than that, it's not Social Security, it's supplemental security income. So just note the 2 differences between those. So as I mentioned earlier, there are some commonalities between the 2 benefits, because remember, they live in the same house. They live in the SSA house. And the very piece that also that folks have to meet to qualify for the benefit is the same, right? So whether I'm applying for Title II or I'm applying for SSI, I have to meet the definition of disability. And SSA is very clear on their definition. So here it is word for word. The law defines disability as the inability to engage in any substantial gainful activity. So we'll talk more about what SGA is, by reason of any medically determinable physical or mental impairment, which can be expected to result in death, or which has lasted or can be expected to last for a continuous period of not less than 12 months. So what does that mean? So really, to kind of sum it up, SSA defines disability as that your disability, which is going to either result in death or last longer than 12 months, your disability is going to keep you from engaging in a substantial gainful activity, right? So that's really what they're saying, that your disability, again, keeps you from meeting SGA, and you have to meet that definition in order to access either of those benefits. Okay, so again, know that the definition applies to both benefits. Another commonality that they both have is that you have to go through a medical continuing disability review, or a CDR. We love acronyms, right? So both SSI and Title II disability beneficiaries must have a medical CDR every so often. So that's SSA's way of checking in and making sure that you're still entitled for the benefit. So a medical CDR is really just looking at somebody's ability to engage in substantial gainful activity or if they've made medical improvement. And there are three different pots that folks fall into. So at this stage, I've become entitled to the benefit. And so they're looking at, okay, what if, so the three different pots are likely to improve, which means my medical review takes place every 13 to 18 months. Every 3 to 5 years is the next group, and that's labeled as possibly will improve. And then 7 to 10 years is not likely to improve. So here are some very basic examples. My sister experiences an intellectual disability. Her intellectual disability is not going to go away. That's part of who she is. So she is lumped into the group of 7 to 10 years because that's not likely to improve. However, if I'm someone who is experiencing kidney failure and I'm on the transplant list and I receive a transplant, then I may be likely to improve, right? Because I'm going to receive that transplant. So know that beneficiaries are on a whole spectrum of disability, right? So just know that folks get grouped into that three different pots. So that medical review will happen, and oftentimes they'll receive a letter and it might say, oh, your medical review is coming up. And so for folks, you just want to be able to, if someone comes up to you and says, oh, I have a medical review for Social Security Administration, it's really important that they follow through with that. For those of you who have heard about Ticket to Work, if someone assigns their ticket, and if you haven't, no worries, we'll talk about this later in the series. But if you have a ticket and you assign that ticket to an employment network, the benefit to the beneficiary is it pauses that medical CDR as long as they're making timely progress. So again, if someone is assigning their ticket, the benefit to the beneficiary is that CDR gets put on pause as long as they're making timely progress according to SSA. Another little piece is Section 301, which this wouldn't be something you need to memorize. Continues payment if someone is found medically improved. So that means if someone's working with voc rehab and finding employment and they had their medical review and they were found to be medically improved, as long as they're continuing with voc rehab, those payments are going to continue. So the reality is Social Security Administration has really kind of built in some nice things to incentivize work, and we'll continue to talk about those throughout this series. So again, we just talked about the commonalities between the two benefits, that medical CDR and the definition of disability. So we're going to go back to that visual again, and I want you to open the door to Title II benefits, and I want you to close the door to SSI. So when it comes to Title II benefits, again, we've talked about how it's an insurance benefit, right? Somebody is paying into the system in order for you to receive the benefit. So with Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI, remember that I'm pulling that benefit off of my own work record. And so I've paid into the system and I now meet the definition, right, of disability. So my disability keeps me from meeting SGA, and I've worked a certain amount and I'm pulling off of my own work record. So that's SSDI. CDB, or the Child Disability Benefit, is I'm pulling that benefit off of an insured parent. So I'm an adult child. My disability occurred prior to me becoming an adult, so it happened as a child. And my parent is either retired, deceased, or disabled and has paid into the system, and that I'm pulling off of their work benefit. Or there's the disabled widower benefit, and that's where I'm pulling off of my deceased insured spouse, right? So with all of the Title II benefits, someone has paid into the system, right? So it's based off of somebody's work record. The other piece, so I have to meet the insured status. I have to have paid into the system in order to receive the benefit, and then I have to experience a disability meeting SSA's definition, right? And we know that that doesn't change for either benefit. I have to meet that definition of disability. So to dive into each of these a little bit, so with SSDI, this is really interesting to folks, and we'll provide a document that walks through the different credits. But you have to earn a certain number of credits. So in general, I have to have about 20 credits earned in a 10-year period prior to my disability onset. So if I want to access my Title II benefit, I have to have earned about 20 credits in a 10-year period, and I can earn 4 credits per year. Okay, so just know that that's kind of a roundabout for SSDI. I've paid in, I've worked a certain amount, I can earn 4 credits per year. So if you're supporting someone who hasn't worked a day in their life and they're receiving a Title II benefit, they're most likely not receiving SSDI. They're most likely receiving Child Disability Benefit, or CDB. And with CDB, I have to be an adult, right? But my disability occurred as a child, and I'm pulling from an insured parent who has become retired, disabled, or passed away, and they've paid into the system. So again, for that example, if you're working with someone who's 21 and they haven't worked a day in their life, then you know they're not pulling from an SSDI benefit that you would ask about their parent, So tell me about your parents. Oh, my dad just retired a few years ago from being a CPA. Oh, well, then, they're probably pulling off of their parents' benefit. And then the disabled widower benefit, you have to be over 50, have an insured spouse who's passed away, and the disability incurred within a prescribed period. And so again, I haven't even worked with a disabled widower benefit. So again, it's a very, very small population. And most of the folks that you're working with would be receiving an SSDI benefit or a CDB benefit. One thing I also would like you to walk away with today is that each benefit, so Title II benefits and SSI, they each are married to a medical benefit. And Title II is married to Medicare. And so in order for me, when I become entitled to my Title II benefit, I have a 24-month waiting period to get access to Medicare. But know that Title II and Medicare, they're married, and they live in that room within the SSA house. So just know that they go together. And we'll talk about SSI here shortly. Another unique thing about a Title II benefit is that the check amount is going to be individualized. So every person's Title II benefit is based on those taxable earnings that they've paid into the system. Therefore, if I have only worked 12 years and somebody else has worked 20 years and we're both pulling off of our benefits, the person who worked 20 years is going to have a much higher check than me who has worked 12 years. And so know that their check is going to be very different based on how much they have paid into the system. And then also with CDB and DWB, just remember that check amount would be based on the insured worker's taxable earnings. So a nice way to figure out what check someone is receiving is that if the numbers are different and you would compare that against an SSI benefit, you'll know that they're receiving a Title II check. So again, we'll get into that here in just a minute. If I'm receiving Title II and I have earned income, it's important to know how earned income is defined within SSA. And with Title II, it's all or nothing. So if I go to work, if you're working with a beneficiary who, say, receives SSDI, so they're pulling from their own work record, and if I go to work, it's the piece to remember is that I either get all of my SSDI check or I get none of my SSDI check. And so in webinar 2, we're going to get really down to the specifics about when I get that check or when I don't get that check. But know that Title II is all or nothing. I get the check or I don't get the check. There's no wiggle room. It doesn't go up or down. I either get the check or I don't. Okay, so remember, Title II is an earned benefit. It goes with Medicare, and I either get my check or I don't when it comes to countable earnings. Okay, so that means when I've gone to work, what happens to that benefit? It's all or nothing. So here's just a quick check. So a Title II benefit check is the same amount for everyone who receives the benefit. True or false? And it looks like I forgot an S. I'm sorry. So again, Title II check, is it the same amount for everyone who receives the benefit? The answer is false. Remember, Title II disability benefits is an insurance benefit, and it's based on what someone's paid into the system. So each person's Title II check is going to look different based on what they've earned or paid into the system. All right, so now I'd like you to close the door to Title II, and I'd like you to open the door to SSI. So we're switching tracks here a bit, and now we're going to focus on SSI for the remainder of our time, and then we'll dive into Title II in next week's webinar. So with SSI, remember, it's supplemental security income. It's not Social Security income, right? It's supplemental security income. And in order for me to receive this benefit, again, I have to experience a disability and meet that definition of disability that SSA sets, right? So that's the same for both benefits. I have to meet the definition. Also, I have to be an adult. So again, it's really important that within our time that we're talking about SSI, that we're talking about the adult-based benefit. It's not the child benefit. There is a child SSI benefit that folks can receive under the age of 18, but it's different, right? So it's just important to know that if you are working with students and they're receiving SSI under the age of 18, that once they turn 18, they would go through a redetermination as an adult. And so it's also a little known fact that about 50% of the folks that are receiving, that children who are receiving SSI, when they go through that age 18 redetermination, only about 50% of the folks still continue to receive SSI as an adult. So just know that, again, the child disability benefit is different. And so we are just focusing on the adult-based SSI benefit. So remember that when we first started talking about SSI, that it's based on financial need. The ugly name for it is welfare. So in order for me to get onto SSI, I have to prove that I have a financial need. And so I would have limited resources. So my limited resources either need to be below $2,000 as an individual or $3,000 for a couple. So again, I have to have limited resources, and we'll talk about what resources are. And then I also have to have limited income. So below $771 or below $1,157 for a couple in 2019. And so it's also important to note that that limited income amount can change based on cost of living adjustments yearly. So whether you are, if you watch this webinar next year, know that you need to check what those SSA numbers are, as they can be adjusted yearly. And the other piece to know about SSI is that no matter where you live, the benefit check is the same. So it's $771, whether you live in Utah, whether you live in California, Iowa, Nebraska, Tennessee. It's the same amount wherever you live. So it's $771. The other piece, so again, I have to have limited resources and I have to have limited income in order to receive SSI. It's a needs-based benefit. So again, the resource limit is $2,000 for an individual, $3,000 for a couple. So that financial test, they're looking to say, okay, each month, are Ashley's resources above $2,000? If they are, then I wouldn't have access to Medicaid or my SSI. If my resources are below the limit, then I move on to that income test. So again, they're looking at, are my resources above or below a certain limit, right? And so oftentimes we hear the statement of, oh, Joe has a spend down. So oftentimes Joe is creeping up towards that $2,000 amount, and he has to have less than $2,000 in his bank account. So oftentimes folks will have a spend down to make sure that they're meeting that resource limit. So the resources are things that you own or that could be liquidated to pay for food and shelter. So that could be a bank account, stocks, bonds. And so when someone's applying for SSI, again, SSA is looking at all of those accounts. They're looking at financially, do you have a financial need for this benefit? There are things that can be excluded. That's a house that you live in, one car, ABLE accounts under $100,000, or funded individual development accounts. So there are certain things that can be excluded. A big piece is when folks have income coming in, that will change an SSI check, right? Because it's a financially needy benefit. I have to have a financial need in order to access this benefit. So if I have income coming in, it's going to change that benefit, because SSA, Social Security Administration, says if you're receiving SSI and you have other money coming in, this is a financially needy benefit. So if you have other ways to pay for things, we're going to decrease your check, right? And so one of the ways that that happens is when folks go to work, right? So we need to know what's income when I receive SSI. So income is anything that's earned, right? So that means I'm going to work. My gross wages, when I get a paycheck, it's going to decrease my SSI check because I have more money coming in. So gross wages. Or what if I'm self-employed? So SSA calls that net earnings from self-employment, or NESE. And so my net earnings from self-employment would impact my SSI check. Also, unearned income, which would be anything that isn't earned. So for example, a Social Security Disability Insurance check, that is going to decrease my SSI check as well. So Social Security Administration says if you have any other income coming in, so they're checking to see, do you have a Title II benefit? If you do, that's going to reduce your check. Are you working? If you are, that's going to reduce your check. Also, if you have any in-kind support, so if someone is paying for your food and shelter, that's also going to decrease your check. So oftentimes you may hear of someone receiving SSI and they are paying their parent rent. That's so that they can receive their full federal benefit of $771. Because if they weren't paying for rent, SSA says, well, gee, if you're not paying for rent, you don't need the full value of this check, and they'll reduce it by 1/3. Okay. So again, anything that's coming in, any other money, because it's financially needy benefit, it's going to change that check amount. So let's do a quick check-in. So what is the SSI federal benefit rate in 2019? And we just talked about this briefly. So A, $735, B, $771, C, $800, or D, $750. And the answer is, in 2019, the federal benefit rate is $771 a month for an individual. So again, know that no matter where I live in the country, that the federal benefit rate for SSI is $771. So that's a really nice way for you to, if you're trying to figure out what benefit an individual receives, in conversation you might ask, are you currently receiving any SSA benefits? Oh, yes. Okay, well, do you mind if I ask, do you receive one check or two checks? Oh, well, I receive one check. And do you know how much that check amount is? Oh, yep, it's $771. Oh, great. So you receive one check and it's $771 a month. Yes. Then you know that they receive an SSI benefit, right? So, and again, we're going to dive into each webinar a little bit further so that you have a little bit more of an idea of each benefit and the work incentives that also go along with it. So today, again, the intent was just for you to know the very basic concepts of Title II and SSI. So as we wrap up, I really want to just point out a really interesting piece, right? About loss aversion. So it's the thought that the pain of losing is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. And so loss aversion absolutely applies to benefits, because as folks are thinking about working and thinking about obtaining that job, we have to remember that the idea of losing that benefit, even though it's rooted oftentimes in myth after myth, But psychologically, that is twice as painful is the idea of gaining, right? So even though it may be the perfect job at the perfect place with the perfect people, and it's the absolute right fit, right? But just the thought of risking those benefits is twice as powerful. And so that's why we have to be ready to go with accurate information around benefits, because as an entire team, as an entire system of supports for a person, we have to be more comfortable in talking about how benefits and work go together so that folks can really work at their full potential. So I want to leave that with you today. And please, I hope that you will join us for our next webinar where we will dive into Title II benefits in more detail. And then our third and fourth webinars will be diving into SSI and work incentives as well. So thank you so much for joining us for our first webinar, and I will look forward to seeing you next week.